Thank you. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here at multiple levels. One is I'm a graduate of this institution. It's really exciting to be in my alma mater. I'm really grateful when some of my teachers are here for the education that has been provided. I know there's some medical students here. I want to reassure you that really Michigan State has provided a great foundation and education for your careers. Farha, I want to thank Farha in particular for organizing this. Everybody has been thanking her. But Farha is really emerging as a national leader in Muslim mental health. And I think it's really important, both for Michigan State University and Michigan in general, that this center is going to become the national center for the study and the research for Muslim mental health. As she said, she's bringing the journal Muslim mental health. It's on its 6th year. And it's a peer-reviewed academic journal indexed in multiple databases, and it's really one of the authoritative resources for literature in this field. Okay, so my talk is going to bring together, it's going to thread many of the themes we've been talking about in the morning that we'll be talking about in the afternoon. My talk will be relevant to clinicians, to policymakers. I know there's some mayors and congressmen here. There are policy thinkers here, as well as people interested in Islam in America. So really my talk is going to thread together much of those themes. I even have 2 slides for you, Dr. Hamada, about Islam in America that you're going to be interested in. So if you're not buying into my self-promotion and you decide to leave after 5 minutes, I want you to leave with these 3 take-home messages. Number 1 is that mental health is culturally determined. That mental health is indeed defined by culture. And we as clinicians have to appreciate that. Especially for the trainees here, you have to really appreciate how the role of culture in determining psychopathology and diagnosing people. If I were to tell you that I'm having whispers in my ear, that the devil's telling me that this is a very antagonistic audience, and you're going to have a tough time here on the podium, is that delusional? Is that psychotic? Or is that something that's culturally appropriate in my situation? If I were to tell you that every time I watch a Michigan State basketball game, they lose, but every time I don't watch them, they tend to perform very well. Is that delusional or is that superstitious? So culture plays a very big role in how we label people's mental health. The second take-home point for my talk is that clergy across cultures and religion plays a very important role in mental health. When 9/11 happened, mental health clinics were not flooded shortly thereafter. Churches and synagogues, and in some cases even mosques, were flooded with people trying to reconcile with what just happened, for finding meaning and finding a place to deal with their emotional distress. So the clergy can play a very important role from the public health perspective. It's a cost-effective, evidence-based way of dealing with emotional distress in the community. So for the policymakers and public health experts, really we need to think about how to include imams and clergy members into the mental health system. The third issue that is very relevant for those scholars in American Islam is the emerging discipline of Islamic chaplains. And I want to make a case that the discipline of Islamic chaplains, in other words, the professionalization of Islamic authority, is going to transform the nature of Islamic authority in the United States. I'm going to make that case over here. So let's jump right into the lecture. So mental health is culturally determined. Officially on the DSM, the majority of major diagnoses have a cultural qualifier. So for instance, brief psychotic episode. You'll notice that after the first criteria of hallucinations, disorganized speech, delusions, there's a qualifier written in the DSM. If it do not include culturally appropriate symptoms. So you have to, as clinicians, understand the cultural context of your patients. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be experts on every culture in all of your patients, but what it means is that you need to be inquisitive. You need to ask your patients about their cultural context. You need to ask their families. And you have to ask experts such as Dr. Farha Abbasi, but what is the appropriate cultural response in the Muslim context? The second way culture impacts mental health is in general society. I mean, we heard about the social political impact on mental health and emotional distress, but also the culture demands on people. If you live in a culture that stigmatizes people with mental illness, that puts people with severe mental illness in chains, they're going to have a very different course of their mental illness. They're going to have a different resources of dealing with their mental illness. In our society, in our industrialized society in the US and the West, the demands of performance at work doesn't give much room for mental health impairment. If you miss work for a couple of days because you're feeling depressed or anxious, your job would be in jeopardy. So we have to really appreciate kind of the cultural demands and the cultural context of our patients. And there's another kind of interesting area we don't have time to talk about is culturally bound syndromes, which is again at the end of DSM-4, in which there are cultural-based disorders. They don't have a biomedical basis, but have a well-described cultural definition that it directly shows how culture impacts mental health. So people who are interested in the role of culture in mental health tend to first start off by describing how do people process and understand emotional distress. What is their mental health concept? And most researchers divide mental health concepts, the different models of mental health concepts, into these categories. So for clinicians, we understand that emotional distress, depression, anxiety emerges from a biological substrate. And we believe in this biomedical model. That when there's a chemical abnormality, you have emotional problems or psychiatric problems. Other people attribute their emotional problems to their psychosocial environment. They say, well, of course the person can be depressed if they just lost their job. And so there's kind of a psychosocial explanation to mental illness. The other explanation people often use is the moral explanation. This is more like moral judgment. That person is depressed because they're weak, because they lack strength, or because they're lazy. And so that's sometimes how people explain away emotional distress or how people have mental illness. The other way is a magical way. And that's the idea that a person was placed on in witchcraft, for instance, or a possession, a spirit possession that led to this person having problems with their thinking or with their emotional stability. And the other model is a spiritual model. The idea that because of a lack of faith, because of your lack of believing in a higher being, whether it be God or somebody else, that's why the person is depressed or whatnot. And so how does this relate to Muslims? Well, even Muslims who come from very traditional societies often want a quick fix. They want a silver bullet, that you take this pill and your problems are going to go away. And I would warn our clinicians in the audience, especially the psychiatrists, that even though that your patients might want that, you need to educate them about the limitations of psychotropic medications. That this pill is not going to get your job back. This pill is not going to bring your spouse back. But this pill is going to get you at a place where you can start dealing with your social situation. The other issue to realize about Muslims is that most Muslims, obviously in America and also Muslims from overseas, come from cultures where psychiatrists, Muslim psychiatrists, even in the quote-unquote Muslim world, are trained in management of medication and do operate in the biomedical model. So even people from immigrants or people from traditional societies have some exposure to the biomedical model. It's not completely foreign to them. The other thing to appreciate in terms of the Muslim context is that the biomedical model is not in conflict with the Islamic tradition. That pre-modern philosophers talked about the role of the brain in delirium, in melancholy, even during the quote-unquote Dark Ages. And interestingly, there's even a pre-modern literature about the rights of people who who suffer from psychiatric illness, who are insane, and in Islamic legal literature. So the next the model, psychosocial distressors, and how it pertains to Muslims. So certainly across cultures or across communities, we all have stressors, whether it's family conflict, economic conflict, that psychosocial stressors such as problems with self-esteem affects all of us. With Muslims, we heard about kind of the social political realities that affects their self-esteem and their state. That certainly there's a sense among the American Muslim community and the global Muslim community that we're under siege. And that causes a lot of psychological distress, a lot of emotional distress, as you heard from other speakers and you will continue to hear. And as you heard from Samira earlier, many younger American Muslims often have these identity conflicts, which whenever you have an internal conflict, emerges anxiety. So, who am I? Am I American? Am I Muslim? Where do my values stand? What should I do? How do I reconcile this with my peer group? And so certainly that's a particular challenge to the American Muslim community. And this is a busy slide, but just to show you, this study was in New York City and showed that people attributed their psychological stress to 9/11. Now, whether there's a link or not, this is the perspectives that Muslims in New York City had, that the 9/11 affected their self-esteem. The 9/11 affected how they cope with things. So the point being of this slide is social political situation affects Muslims' kind of psychological reserves. The other issue, in terms of another model to explain away emotional distress, is that magical model. Now, this you see both, even in the U.S., but you see that particularly overseas. The person comes with a hallucination or a logical hallucination that the family attributes this to a possession, a spirit possession. And I would caution you, even as Muslim clinicians, not to dismiss this. What I tend to do with I've seen this quite a bit. I almost see this on a monthly basis, where a person has either a psychotic breakdown or some type of breakdown, and they say, okay, well, clearly a spirit has possessed this person. So what I tell my patients in that situation is that, jinn exists, it's in the Quran, that's not my specialty, I'm not an exorcist, so I can't really do much for you. If you want to go with the imam, I'd be happy to work with that imam. But what I can do for you is treat the problem. And so let's try this out. And sometimes I call the imam, we work together with this patient, and we've had good responses with that. So the point here is whatever your patient's model is, you have to work within that model, even that means working with the imam and the family. The other idea is the morality of the Islamic tradition, that people often will say that I'm suffering because the God is punishing me, or they become fatalistic. This becomes tricky, but from a clinical standpoint, for the therapist in the room, I think doing cognitive restructuring, more of a cognitive type of therapy, and thinking about alternative ways of conceptualizing what's causing their emotional distress is most helpful. It's a little bit more of a challenging thing. And there certainly are alternative ways of drawing from the Islamic tradition and coming up with alternative models to understanding what's causing their emotional distress. And certainly, Muslims do believe that, this is another, again, a study from New York City, do believe in multiple, have multiple models of understanding their emotional distress, and they do believe in using the Quran and the Sunnah to deal with their emotional distress, but they also don't rule out the role of psychotherapy and medicine when addressing their emotional distress. And every religion has certain themes, and it's important for clinicians to appreciate some of the themes that can help in terms of resilience and coping with emotional distress in the Islamic tradition. Is the theme of nourishing your spiritual self, of using reminders. I mean, the whole reason why prayer is mandated to be prayed 5 times a day is to remind the person of the role of God in their lives. And certainly, there's a theme of abstinence and self-restraint, and those themes can be used in the clinical encounter to help your patients be resilient also. So, moving on from the kind of clinical encounter to the role of the imam. So you saw earlier how even American Muslims do feel that the Quran and the Sunnah, the Islamic tradition, can help deal with their emotional distress. And so there's definitely a feeling that there should be a role for the imams in working with the Muslim community. Now, from a public policy standpoint, from a public health standpoint, there is a model that is promoted by the WHO. And this is a model developed basically for resource-poor states. And we need to start thinking about this in places like Michigan, where we do have lack of resources. And when budget cuts happen, across the street in Lansing, one of the first things to go is budgets for mental health. So, and this is kind of a complicated slide, but what it shows is the majority, from bottom to top, goes the level of complexity and the level of how expensive services are. So the green bottom part of the pyramid shows self-care. For the majority of emotional distress, when you have a bad day or something, you're grieving a loss of a loved one, you can take care of it with, by yourself, with loved ones. Once you start getting to more complicated emotional distress, you need other community services. And the next level is what the WHO would like to see primary care providers addressing kind of more basic mental illnesses like depression and anxiety. And then after that, the next level being specialists like psychiatrists. And then at the top is institutionalization. And so that's kind of the model. Now, as you go up, you need more, fewer clinicians, but it's also more expensive. Now, what I'm promoting here is that level above the green, that informal community care providers, that should be the imams and Islamic chaplains. There are many more of those imams and Islamic chaplains than there are psychiatrists and psychologists. They're much cheaper than psychiatrists and psychologists, and Muslims believe in them. Muslims go to them for their distress. So, again, in the New York City study done in Columbia, what Muslims believe the role of Islamic chaplains, one of the primary roles is to serve as counselor and advisor. And over 60% of Muslims, or 80% of Muslims, believe very strongly that the role of the imam is to provide counseling. Now, why include imams? Well, for one thing, Muslims go to them when they have problems. If they have a marital conflict, they won't go to a marital counselor, they go to imams to kind of work it out. And there's less stigma. There's less stigma that the imam told you, be nice to your wife, as opposed to the therapist did or the psychiatrist did. Also, that especially more traditional Muslims, more observant Muslims may feel that the imam or the Islamic chaplain will understand their cultural context. I've talked to Muslim women who wear the hijab, and when they've seen mental health professionals, they spend half the time explaining to the mental health professional why they wear hijab. So they spend their time, when they're going there to deal with their emotional distress, they're spending their time being culture ambassadors and educating their therapists. So there's this kind of cultural disconnect that Muslims would prefer to go to imams and chaplains perhaps than mental health professionals. The other thing is, of course, that imams and chaplains are more affordable than psychiatrists. In New York City, it's not uncommon that a psychiatrist will charge about $500 an hour to see you. Of course, it's much cheaper in Michigan, but imams are free for the most part. And of course, who can compete when the imam says, according to Allah, this is what you should do? And so there's an authoritative component to going to the imam or to an Islamic authority, whereas psychiatrists really can't and shouldn't say that. So challenges and limitations. Obviously, there are challenges in using imams and chaplains in the mental health system. One obvious challenge is the cultural barrier, that especially for second generation people, there is a disconnect. If you're a foreign born or foreign educated imam and you really don't understand what's happening, you could do and say things that are really not only politically incorrect, but also quite inappropriate. Also, in terms of training, imams are not trained in psychotherapy. They're not trained in identifying mental illness. Imams don't screen for substance abuse in patients, and that's an issue. Another issue in terms of training is that what we're trained as mental health professionals is how to keep strict boundaries. Imams and local imams, I know of local imams in Detroit, that people knock on their house in the middle of the night. People call them up to borrow money. And so what happens is that imams get burnt out, or they get into these slippery ethical dilemmas with their constituents, if you will. And of course, there might be a situation where the imams have conflict. They themselves don't buy into the mental health paradigm. They don't think depression is a real illness. And so there are challenges working with imams. So the last take-home point is that there is this emerging field of Islamic chaplaincy. And Islamic chaplaincy is an area where people are being professionally trained in basically secular institutions to be the religious authority for that institution. So those institutions include prison, military, university, and hospital. Now, this is very important for Islam in America because, to be quite frank, this is a much more economically stable situation for a religious scholar or religious authority than working in the mosque. Most mosques, they have to kind of gather money, they pay the imam on a yearly basis, there's no benefits, there's certainly no retirement plan. Whereas if you work for the government or you work for the university, you're working 9 to 5, you're getting a steady salary, there's a lifetime salary, and there's benefits. And so you're going to see more and more imams and Islamic religious authorities take these jobs and become Islamic chaplains in these institutions. And what's happening now is that hospitals and universities are saying, okay, well, we're going to hire an Islamic chaplain, but we need to know that you're a real Islamic chaplain. So right now there's a certification there's an effort to develop a certification process. So what does that mean? What does that mean to Islam in the West and Islamic authority? That means that there's going to be core competencies. If I want to certify you as an Islamic chaplain, what's the religious, I think I'm skipping over a line. What's the Islamic competency you should have? How much of the Quran should you know? How much of Islamic law should you know? How much of counseling should you know? How much of American culture should you know? If you're an imam from Egypt who just came, you're kind of fresh off the boat and you just came in 2 years ago, what do you know about African American Islam? What do you know about Nation of Islam? And so there's going to be kind of core competencies that are going to be demanded of the Islamic chaplains that's going to really change the identity of Islamic authority in the United States and maybe even internationally. And what happens is, what's already happening, there is an Islamic chaplaincy program at Harvard Seminary. And so these Muslim imams are being trained by priests and ministers and rabbis on how to counsel, how to provide pastoral care. And so there's this ecumenical culture in these seminaries that's really changing how imams think and approach people in terms of counseling and whatnot. And so what's also very interesting, that's going to affect Islamic authority in the U.S. in terms of this Islamic chaplaincy, is that the employers of the Islamic chaplains have certain demands. So if you're an imam sitting in your masjid, in your office, you can kind of cherry pick what issue you want to deal with. If a person comes to you, you can kind of brush them off or deal with it or not. But if you're working in a hospital, whether you want to or not, you're going to be sent to a patient and said, okay, the patient's asking you, should you withdraw life-sustaining treatment? Is that halal? Is that allowed in Islamic tradition? And you're going to have to confront that issue. If you're in a university Islamic chaplain and you have a homosexual Muslim kid that's kind of dealing with this issue, you're going to have to deal with it because that's what your employer demands, and that's a requisite of being an Islamic chaplain. So for these reasons, Islamic chaplaincy is going to really change religious authority in America. And so those are kind of some of the issues. I mean, if you imagine a military chaplain, how does the Islamic military chaplain kind of reconcile, deal when war has been taking place in the Muslim world? So there's all these ethical issues and interesting issues that Islamic chaplains are going to have to deal with. So the future of Islamic chaplaincy, I think there's a role for Farha and the Center for Muslim Mental Health to play in the development of this field. The role they can play is, for one thing, teach them about psychopathology, which we're already doing. We're actually teaching a course on mental health at the Harvard Seminary. Two is teach them basic counseling skills and actually listen to the people, give them kind of, some time to work through their problems. Also teach them about professional boundaries and clinical boundaries. I think that's very important for imams and chaplains, so they don't get into burnout and compassion fatigue. And also it's going to be very interesting, the role of mental health professionals in developing the core competencies for certification of Islamic chaplains. And I think this is a kind of a very interesting issue for Islam in America. And so these are kind of some resources that you can go to, including our organization, Muslim Mental Health. And I thank you for your time, and I guess we'll answer questions at the end of the day.